How are we going to do that? Like, you want me to just ask the question and just let you guys
start a recording because Anita's in. Hello, Miss Anita. Florence and I said we could go one after the other. We'll just go back and forth. That way it's easy.
Okay. Good deal. Good deal. Excuse me 1 second. Let me get one more thing.
Okay. We're good.
All right. Shall we begin, or you want to? It's 11 o'clock on the nose. Welcome everybody to this free webinar, this free Q&A, specifically dealing with the topic of community associations. Obviously, there's a ton of things happening right now at the Orlando Law Group. We want to certainly empower our clients and non-clients with important information so that they can assess their own situations, make sure that they are properly informed and have right information so that they can lead and guide their respective associations. Before we get started, I'm going to introduce, you probably know who these people are, but I certainly do, but let me do that on my own here. First, we have Miss Florence King. I know her very well, also known as my wife, but been in the community association industry for a very long time, almost approaching 15 years. And we also have the founder and owner of the Orlando Law Group, Ms. Jennifer Englert, who is a rock star. I call her the people's champ, but and it's not because she's just my boss, but she's definitely somebody that we've looked up to, we've enjoyed working with, and she's very informed on a plethora of information regarding law, not just in community associations, but we've certainly made our mark, especially more recently getting more in depth with the community association practice to lead and guide our communities and help everybody do what they need to do to stay focused, solid, and lead. It's all about leadership, leadership, leadership. All right. Well, with that being said, let's just get started. We have a plethora of questions that we've received throughout the last week or so. As you know, we've put out this event so that we could get some of those questions in early. I wanted to make sure that we have time later to add a few additional ones, but before doing that, we want to tackle these important questions because these are the most important that have been brought up by people, and some of them have been brought up multiple times. So that being said, let's get started. First question, is there liability for the board if it does not inform the community that someone tested positive for the COVID-19 virus?
Florence, you want to take the first one, or you want me to take the
Jen, you want to start, or you want me to start?
Okay. Oh, well, yeah, we're going to go back and forth so you don't get too tired of either one of us. So, but we've all looked at all the questions. So I think people have started to settle down on this topic. There was initially a lot of concern about letting people know potentially or not letting people into gated communities if it was known that they had the virus, or checking or locking things down and that sort of thing. And that's not something that you can do because obviously people have a right to be in their home that they own. Now, if the board becomes aware of a threat to the community, then again, that's one of the situations where you probably need to talk to your community association, at least your CAM, and probably your attorney to see how to handle things. We're going to talk a little bit more later about common areas and that sort of thing and how to handle that. But depending on how you're handling things globally and what amenities you have in your community, how you allow renters and that sort of thing, and whether you have gates, it's not a one size fits all. In general, nobody should be going on Nextdoor and Facebook and that sort of thing and spreading around who has the coronavirus in your community. That's not something that we should be doing, and there could be potential liability for that. But if there's some concerns, there's some things that you could do to deal with it. In general, I would err on the side of not spreading around people's medical information, but there is some times where it could be a relevant thing, and you kind of have to be reasonable about it.
Great answer. Okay, and speaking of common areas, that is a great segue into the next question. Florence, why don't you take this one? What if an infected resident needs to get in-unit service? This is more in terms of condos, probably more so than that, maybe a townhome. But if there is an in-unit service, something that needs to be done, especially in emergency, what is the protocol on that? What would you suggest?
So typical attorney answer, it depends. Um, but, this is a difficult question to answer because, as a board and as an association, you are responsible for making sure your residents are taken care of, but also, you want to make sure you're following CDC guidelines, and, you want to make sure you're taking care of the health and safety protocols into consideration. So you want to make sure you're considering, is it an essential service or a non-essential service? So if it is a non-essential service, I would say no, you want to wait until the person is better and they're non-infectious. If it is an essential service, then you want, there are some service providers that are prepared to actually provide those services when people are still infected. They are hard to come by, and the CDC actually provides some of these providers, a list of these providers. Get with your attorney, get with us. We are here to help you find these people. Get with the CDC, they will provide you these providers, but you cannot ignore them. They are your residents. As a board, you have responsibilities. You cannot ignore these residents because they are infected. So you have responsibilities. But you want to always weigh, are they an essential service? Is it not an essential service at that time?
And I know that essential versus non-essential question is a hot button topic as well. And it's probably, it kind of depends on the person who would say what's essential and not. You want to give some definitive, like what would you think is absolutely an essential service, in terms of, especially a kind of, what one or two things would you say, this is absolutely an essential service?
Plumbing is an essential service.
So if there's a plumbing issue and you have COVID-19, you don't have to be out of luck.
Service. Yes. Cable TV, not an essential service. I know people think it is right now because they want to know what's going on. Not an essential service.
Nice. All right, good deal, good deal. All right, so next question, Jen, that's for you. Can we prevent residents we know that have traveled to any high-risk areas like China, South Korea, Italy, so forth, from returning to their units or homes?
Definitely cannot do that because they have a right to be in their home. We've had a little bit of that even with renters and people doing stuff like having just a room rented. There's been a lot of that right now. And another reason why you can is because there's no court intervention that can help you at this time. So, I mean, it cuts both ways right now. All evictions and all that are closed, and it's really hard to get into court if you're kept away from your home. But it's definitely, which means that the damages would be greater. I'm kind of getting with the essential, not essential also. House cleaners, nannies, that sort of thing. You can't keep them out either. But if you're uncertain about whether somebody is essential or not essential for third-party providers, there is some guidance on that with the governors. The governor put out what's essential and not essential. At first, the mayor did, depending on where you're living in the city or the county, which county, but the governor of the state of Florida put out what that is. Construction still essential. So, I mean, people coming in to do, a lot of people are having stuff done at their home right now. Even that you can't keep out from your neighborhood because it is essential. And unless you have a total knowledge that somebody is ill and putting your other residents at risk, there's really not a whole lot you could do about it.
Nice. Good. And next, Florence, can we ask potential purchasers and potential renters if they have traveled to any high-risk areas? Is there any violations to that?
So again, you got to remember who you are, right? We are not, you're the HOA. You are not the actual purchase, you're not the homeowner. So talk to your attorney because you are going to be putting in rules and regulations in your documents. So how you do this is very important. So You want to make sure that if you're wanting to amend your documents, if you're wanting to put in new rules and regulations, there are certain ways you can amend certain documents, and we can help you do that. But you cannot just go around asking certain questions just because you want to know, just because you are scared. You want to be careful on how you do these things, because you cannot violate people's privacies, people's freedoms, because you want to be safe. Yes, the safety of your residents is important at times like these, but you cannot violate people's freedoms in order to do that. So how you go about wanting to find this information out is important. You want to make sure you're protecting the association from liability while you're wanting to protect your residents and the association and how you're doing that information.
And so, like, the more information you know, the bigger the liability, I guess, right? So the less you know, the better, baby. Would you say that's
Well,
fair?
how you get that information is very important.
Which is a perfect segue to the next question for Jen. In terms of communication, communicating with residents is so key, very important, even not during a pandemic. But what are the best methods to communicate with residents? Maybe not just on this, but on a plethora of topics.
Yeah, I mean, and that's always a challenge for an HOA, because often they might have a Facebook page, but then there's unofficial Facebook pages. There's the next door, which a lot of us are familiar with, which normally is not affiliated with the HOA itself. It's just some resident who lives there or might live very adjacent. And then it kind of gets crazy because the message is muddled, or you don't know where the message is clearly coming from. So a website is very good for an HOA. I know we're all kind of getting away from that, but websites are a good place to put your governing documents and a bunch of other things that people need to refer to all the time. A website that's kind of a living website that's not static, that you could put information on that people know to look at, is awesome. If it has the feed to your Facebook page directly so that they continue to update each other, that's really awesome. Some HOAs are very on top of all that and have a really good communications committee. And some HOAs, unfortunately, just don't have enough people to volunteer for that. But that's all that stuff is really good. If you have a very simple Weebly website or something, it's usually something that somebody can keep up even if they don't want to do the rest of the stuff. In general, newsletters are good. I think now there's a lot of debate about whether they should be mailed out anymore or just be all electronic. I think we've all been on that debate. Mm-hmm. Usually at least 1 or 2 mailed out ones a year are okay. You can sell advertisements in them. I mean, there's a way to pay for it if you're creative. HOAs are businesses. Some people kind of forget that, and there's some ways to pay for things that maybe if you think outside the box, then at least everybody could get it in their hand and have it, especially a couple, if it has that essential information that people need to know. Now, Facebook pages are very good too. People are, I mean, it's just something that's out there in the world and a lot of people use it. The issue then is, what is the actual Facebook page for the neighborhood? Some really big ones have several. I live in Avalon Park, and anyone who lives in Avalon Park will giggle because we have like and some of them are very informative and some of them are very not. So one of the things that we do with our associations is I've trademarked the name of associations for associations before, and then we can only use the logo and the trademark on the official Facebook page, which kind of helps. And then it's obviously ongoing information that's easy to get out to the masses. The last is using email blasts, which it's usually a struggle to get good email addresses for everybody, especially if you've got a lot of renters, but that's something to try as well. Now, as posting meeting stuff, because that's now, if people aren't using your clubhouse anymore because they're not allowed there. I mean, posting stuff as many places as you could think of, by mailboxes, on the glass door, if that's the gym's closed, but you have that. Those are all places where you could post information also.
Great. Now, I want to circle back because you said something very key that I've not really heard up to this point from anybody else in terms of trademarking and copywriting, especially the association name. unpack that a little bit, because I don't think that a lot of people think about that. But in terms of Facebook and social media and fake news, that's a good method to maybe protect the association a little bit.
Yes, that's, yeah, a lot of people, because we do business law too, a lot of people don't think about that. Like I said, a lot of the stuff that works for businesses do and should work for HOAs. And a lot of our board members happen to be business owners and stuff, so they want to see that. So if you, and most associations have that logo, and it's not just the name, it's some sort of something that goes along with it. We can trademark just the logo, we could trademark the name and the logo together, or we could trademark the name. And then if you do that, if somebody's trying to use the logo on a competing website or any other way, you could say, look, you can have a Facebook page that's called blank, like Avalon has Avalon Rants. That's cool, but you can't use the Avalon Park, the look of it and stuff. I mean, Lake Nona, everybody knows there's times you could use the words Lake Nona and there's times you can't, and that's because they trademarked it. So, I mean, I think people kind of know it works. They just don't think about it with their association.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, well, we talked a little bit about costs and paying for things, which leads us into a very interesting hot topic in terms of assessments, delinquencies right now, violations, and so forth. So next question for Florence. How should an association handle residents who are late or delinquent in their assessments right now?
Well, I mean, so it's an interesting time, right? People all want to have leniency right now, and they that comes up a lot with associations, but associations are in a unique place. Unlike a business, unlike a mortgage, where, you know, they can get forgiveness programs, they can get, you can close down a business. An association is unique in the sense that you're a community. You know, if you don't pay your assessments, guess who's going to have to foot the bill next year? You know, you are the residents, you pay your own bill. You are the ones funding your own community. So if you don't pay your bill, who pays it next year? You. So it's important for residents to understand, if you, as much as you want to be compassionate to your neighbor who is not paying, if their neighbor doesn't pay, you will be the one that is paying that extra money. You are the one who will be carrying that weight next year. So when you're thinking about delinquent assessments and you want to think about people forgiving some of that, you know, giving them extra time to pay, the more you give time, the harder it's going to be for your neighbor to catch up on that bill next year. And then the assessments that they don't pay now means the budget's going to increase next year, which means now it's going to be harder for everybody to pay next year. And now everybody's assessments are going to go up next year. So it's going to be a long cascading effect for not just the person that didn't pay this year, but for everybody in the community to handle next year. And then it's a ripple effect for the entire community to bear. So when we are thinking about being compassionate, it's the collection policy that the association takes as a whole. You want to think of that long-term effect for everybody. Everyone is struggling, but if you don't collect, then everyone is going to bear that burden later on. So it's the point of collections is not to foreclose. You know, everybody has that misnomer that, hey, you know, association, the big bad association, nobody wants to kick their neighbor out. That is not the point in collections, but you are trying to take care of your community. It's the home, it's the property that you want to live in, it's your family, it's your homestead, and you need that money to actually take care of that community. So yes, you want to try and work with your neighbor, but working with your neighbor means your neighbor needs to come to you. You want to figure out what's going on, but they have to be willing to work with you. If they are not going to be communicating with you, then you need that collection policy. You need to be figuring out a plan, because if they do not pay, guess who is going to be bearing that burden? You and every other neighbor that is paying that bill and who is working hard to come up with that money to pay that bill. So our policy has always been, get the debt paid fast, because if you don't, it's a snowball effect. It's going to become a debt that cannot be paid later on, and the entire community is going to suffer.
Great. So basically, if you don't pay now, that money's not going anywhere. The budget is set, right? So they have to keep that thing on track. If it gets derailed, it's just going to increase for everybody later on, right? I mean,
Well, I mean, and it's for everybody in the community, right? It's not someone outside that's going to come and pay that debt. It's everybody
right.
in that community. It's your neighbors. It's you.
Okay, good, good. All right, in that topic, going to documentation. In terms of trying to work with somebody and in trying to monitor and evaluate who is in a bad situation or not, what kind of documentation should an association ask for a resident who maybe is having a hard time? Because I know, in some of my topics of discussion in different groups that I've been in, it's a little bit difficult to understand who's laid off, who's not, who's working, who's not, who's essential, who's not. What kind of documentation and what kind of protocol can we use, Jen, for kind of assessing that and approaching that in the right manner?
Well, I mean, the number one factor here is to try to be as equal as possible. So everybody who's on an association board always runs the risk of being accused of not treating people equally. So if it's a major problem in your association, because I mean, during the last downturn, about 10 years ago, there were associations that were in danger of going bankrupt and having major problems. Hopefully we won't have this here now, but I mean, if there's some associations out in Osceola with a bunch of Disney workers and things, there might be some associations are probably going to struggle more than others. If you're an association that you think is going to have a major problem with it, that this is not going to be a 2 or 3 month bump, I'd probably come up with some criteria now that you use across the board to evaluate these. The first couple, I mean, I think it's probably pretty easy to do that. But if you're getting 10, 15, 20, you probably want to come up with a criteria and then use it equally. As far as things that, as either somebody who can't pay or something that the association should be looking for, stuff that I'm seeing, especially like with our other business owners also, who are asking for rent abatement and other things. In general, people are wanting a letter showing that you were laid off or furloughed or somehow impacted because of COVID. And unemployment requires that. Pretty much everybody's required that. So you should have something like that from your employer. A business owner or a gig worker or a 1099, all the things we're calling that, then obviously you don't have that. So it's harder to prove. Those people, for that, I've seen either efforts to get money in another way, like applying for the loans or the PPP program and all of that. I know there's been all the articles now about Shake Shack and all, and everybody's very uppy. Like some people do actually get those funds. I do have clients who got those funds, but if you show that you tried to get them and didn't, then that's something that can be used. I mean, commercial space, our landlords all sent us a letter saying, try to get that loan before you ask me for anything. And that's pretty much been across the board. Some other places have also asked if you have insurance, if you're a business and you have some kind of insurance that you might think about, you're probably not going to get it. We did have a webinar about like how to do that as well, but that you applied for that and didn't get it. But just basically efforts to show that you were proactive. I mean, in our collections, we have people, we kind of know them because it comes around a bunch of times. Don't be one of those people.
All right, we're just segueing properly here. So another key question, and I know this has come up a lot, and maybe it has to do with those owners that tend to surface here and there, but you've got an association, you've got residents that aren't able to use some of the amenities in clubhouses and whatnot. How should an association respond, Florence, to a resident who requests maybe an assessment reduction due to not being able to access those amenities that typically they do have access to?
Well, I mean, assessments are not set, daily, monthly, weekly, they're set annually. As much as, boards would like to say they control the budget on a weekly basis, they do not. The budgets are set at an annual meeting. The residents have a say in that budget. And the assessments are set based on that, and you pay per the year. If there is a surplus, God willing that there is at the end of this year, then the residents will get the benefit of that at the end of this year for the next year's budget. But you cannot get a benefit of that right now, because if the boards are able to do that and manipulate the budget on a monthly basis, you know, the associations would be able, you know, associations would run havoc, you know. I mean, there is a reason the statute was written the way it was, so that then there is more control on how an association is run. The statutes are very specific of how often a budget can be adjusted, how often assessments can be adjusted. And so the boards do not have control over that. So as much as the owners would like to see that adjusted because they don't have control, this pandemic was not controlled by the board. It was not controlled by the association. And so they cannot control how assessments are calculated. And so as we cannot adjust that, and neither can the board.
And I said this to somebody recently, because obviously I get these questions sometimes. A pool is going to turn green if you don't keep it clean. And if you don't have the money in the budget, you can't keep it clean. It doesn't matter if you use it or not. It's about the fact of the upkeep, I think. So
yeah, I mean, some of the, like you said, you know, some essential services, those things are still being maintained by the association, whether it's open or not.
Right. So take a long-term look and hope for the long-term benefit. And right now, hunker down and try to do what you can to make sure things are rolling the way it's supposed to be. Good. Violation letters, another key topic. Jen, we'll give this one to you. Should an association continue sending the violation letters? And I love this topic. I think it's going to be fun, but have at it.
Yeah, speaking of green pools, this is a debate we've already had, and I've had it with some of my associations, because if people have lost their jobs and things, you don't want to be like, okay, now pay all these fines. That seems bad. However, at the same time, if you don't kind of keep on top of violations, they just sort of snowball and become worse. And it's a lot of work on however your internal committee's doing it, and then however your staff is doing it. So many people are home now more than they ever have been, and they're probably ever going to be again, God willing. So things like taking in the trash cans, weeding your yard, and those things, if you're not doing those, it doesn't look, no matter what the income is or whatever, it's hard to explain that. Now, resodding your yard, painting your house, that might be stuff that people just couldn't afford to do right now. So while we can kind of use the same stuff that we just talked about as far as how to evaluate whether somebody can really take care of a fine or a violation or not, we can use that same criteria, because again, things that are thousands of dollars like houses and stuff, that should probably have a little bit of a different look than taking in your garbage can and weeding. Things like having the basketball hoop out, having the garage door open. When the kids are home all day and everybody's outside playing, it seems to be the minute that the kids go in for the juice break, that's when the people come around and say, oh, the garage door's up. And we all have that in a meeting. That's probably happened to everyone. So number one, I said this earlier today, let's be reasonable about how we do it and look at the violations overall. It's probably not a one size fits all. Violations never should be, but be considerate of the situation of this that we're in right now and what the violation is. Stuff that's pretty easy to correct that should be corrected, that's stuff that should be getting violation letters. You can ease your violation policy. There's very many different ways to do it. Some people allow multiple letters. Some people charge for every letter. Every association's a little bit different. You can still send out letters. You might want to change the language a little bit. Maybe not do all the fines that are available, or later, when you later have a fining or a violation committee meeting, waive those fines. All those are possibilities, but kind of doing nothing probably isn't a good thing, because some of the stuff, it's an opportunity to bring stuff to people's attention that they might be able to correct. Maybe if it's a lot of pressure washing in your community, the association gets a pressure washing deal and sets it up, because pressure washing is happening. It's something where a neighbor would help a neighbor next door, an elderly, because they're home anyway, if they knew about it. So I think instead of looking at it as an opportunity to make everybody angry, it's an opportunity to build a whole lot of goodwill and community working together if you kind of go about it the right way and you just think about it globally and not just like the violation robot.
Nice. Well, and I know for us, and it's probably true across the board for most people, I'm getting to know my neighbors a lot lately because we're at home. But having that ability to get to know each other a little bit better, be there for each other, very, very good time in our world to be united. And if we all pitch in together, we can, because that's why community associations exist, right? We want to have upstanding communities we can be proud of, that are well taken care of. You know, if we're working all the time, there's the excuse of, oh, I didn't have time to power wash. There's really not a lot of excuse right now, because even if you are essential, people aren't working as much. All right, so now we're going to transition a little bit, because this has been probably one of the most innovative times we've seen, especially with technology. Holding board meetings. Now, as we know, we all know we're participating in this Zoom. I think I wish I bought stock in Zoom about 6 months ago. I've been doing pretty well right now. But in terms of board meetings and our abilities, and we'll go to you for this one, Florence, should board meetings be held during this time, and what should that process look like?
You know, so I had to go to the doctor, you know, a month ago. And I asked my doctor, you know, how long is this going to last? You know, what should I do? And, you know, he gave me a great answer. He actually told me, imagine you're going on a trip and you don't know whether you're going to be gone for 2 years or 2 weeks. You're going to unpack your life, keep living, because you don't know how long this is going to last. So yes, have your board meetings. You know, you don't know how long this is going to last. Don't stop living life. Boards need to run, associations need to run, you know, life needs to keep going. You can't live it the way we were used to living it, but if we are just going to wait for life to restart the way we knew it, you don't know when that is going to be. And the longer associations are going to wait for life to restart the way it was, life, you cannot just hit pause indefinitely. So we need to be creative, we need to be innovative, but you need to follow the rules. That's the most important thing. The rules need to be followed. So yes, board meetings, you cannot have it without giving every owner the opportunity to join. So you cannot have secret board meetings. You need to make sure that owners have the opportunity to join. So you can have virtual board meetings. So you need to make sure that every owner has the opportunity to join. But yeah, you have to the association needs to run. So try and have function as normal as you can, because the world may start back up as soon as possible. The world may not. You can't live in limbo forever. So we want to try and make sure that you just keep functioning, because the more you live in panic, the more your residents live in panic. Yes, safety and the health of your residents are the most important, but you want to keep functioning, you want to keep living. So
this isn't a video game we can pause? Is that
no pause on life.
Well, and I want to, Jen, I want to go to you and unpack that a little bit more, and then talk about more critical meetings, because associations vary on how many times they meet. Some meet semi-annually, some meet only annually, some meet monthly. Talk about some of the variety of different opportunities they can meet, and talk about that annual meeting and why it's important to keep that intact.
Okay. Yeah, this has come up a lot with ARB, ARC meetings, and meetings where, and obviously the annual meeting and elections, where either the Florida statute governs timeframes, or the statutes along with your governing documents have frames. Most ARB, ARC has 30 days, like the documents allow 30 days, and if it's not addressed in some way, then it's approved. You don't want to be the person who wanted to paint their house pink your entire time. You put your application in, ARB didn't decide how to meet, and then in 30 days, technically you might have been approved without any type of meeting. That is bad. So we've been encouraging those to happen by Zoom or GoToMeeting or something like that, not by email, not by personal email. We've had some associations trying to do things like that. None of that really works, especially with documents like that, because if it's through your personal email, then it's very difficult for the association to get those records back. They're really not association records. I had an ARB even way before this that was that president was saving it on their Amazon server personally. Like, you can't be doing things like that because the association has to be able to have the documents to show residents their official records. Now, as far as annual meetings and stuff, just like Florence says, you can't put it on pause. Most of those have a pretty large lead time where you start sending out notices and things at least 60 and some associations 90 days in advance. So it's really tough to not keep those going in some way. If you're an association that doesn't have an on-site community association manager or someone you work with really closely, that's the time when you have to get with them or your lawyer, because you want to follow the law and your governing documents, yet still have a meeting as quickly as possible and still have your election if at all possible. Obviously, if you've got proxies and things, there's ways to do it. But you need to try to go on with that, especially the election, because if you wait, there's no telling when you'll be able to start that clock again in those proxies. If you are doing it and you decide to just do it on your own and don't get help, the board, the one tip that I give everybody is make sure that those ballots are opened and counted in the open. That is always the most important thing in all these elections. But that's, again, like we're doing this on Zoom, that's something that you could do on Zoom. You could have some counters and still practice social distancing if you need it. You need more than one. But I think as long as you try to be reasonable, you try to have it as open as possible. There's always going to be somebody who has a technology glitch, but you do the best that you can. Try to move forward in everything that you need. Some of it the law requires you to do.
And perhaps, since I'm a business development guy, good time to just put it out there that if your law firm doesn't understand technology and opportunities, call me. All right. Had to plug that in. You know, that's what I do. That's what I do.
He has a headset. He knows what to do.
Yeah. All right. I want to get into common areas a little bit, and I want to rapid fire some of the stuff and get through a lot because we got a ton of questions. Florence, I guess this will come to you. Should a community manager or board members encourage residents to wear face coverings in common areas of the association? If so, how are they advising these individuals?
Well, there are some cities that have city mask orders, and if you live in, if your association is in one of those cities, yes, you want to follow the city mask orders. But if you are not in a city that requires it, you want to get with your attorney again. You know, always get with your attorney before you have more restrictive orders, because you want to always balance the health and safety of your residents with the freedoms of your residents. You want to be careful about limiting the freedoms of your residents with the health and safety. So be very careful when you're balancing those two, because you want to always avoid liability for the association. And with everything, you want to document, please document everything you are doing, because when it comes to defending the association, we need to have documentation of everything the association did and why they did it. Because when it comes to any kind of liability defense or any insurance defense claim, we need documentation. So anything the association did, why they did it, in response to what they did, we are going to ask for the documentation. So whatever steps the association takes, make sure you have documentation of whatever steps you took.
Good. Now, common areas, Jen, for you, maybe something like a laundry room, right? If an association has a community setting like that, like a laundry room, which obviously I would call essential, I think everybody would, you want to keep clean clothes on, how should the association go about trying to regulate that situation?
Okay, well, and obviously that's a social distancing problem, especially maybe if you just have like a few washing machines. If there's only one washer and one dryer, not as it'll be kind of going to govern itself. But when there's multiple, there's number one, for the association, be thinking about how you're going to sanitize everything. You definitely have to put something more rigorous into place. There are some companies that have pivoted and are doing like that kind of deep cleaning and killing of germs that you wouldn't think about. I know like Truly Nolan, the mouse that kills bugs, they're doing it. There's some other cleaning companies that are doing it. So that's something to get in place, because you could get it. That's a liability problem if you're not taking that extra mile. Then I would have the residents sign up for the services, so that basically they're putting in the time. You have to have a bunch of people coming and checking or crossing each other's paths. There's things like Sign Up Genius. All of us who volunteer, a lot of volunteer organizations use that. That's something online and really easy. There's doodle polls. There's a few different things that you could do online. That is not going to work for everyone, because I know we have the issue of not having everybody's email address. And once you communicated it out on your social media and everything else like we talked about, you can probably get a lot of people to do that. But there's always the old-fashioned put a schedule up on the door, depending on what type of locking and key code you have, be more restrictive on all of that. But again, back to that, what is a reasonable person going to do? Maybe try some technology you hadn't tried before, like the Sign Up Genius. Always give like the paper method if that's all you've got, or as a backup. And just be thinking about it. Don't ignore the situation. Hit it head on with some sort of solution. And hopefully, mostly residents will appreciate that you tried something, as opposed to just either leaving it unsafe, not trying.
And Florence, for the non-essential things, right? Can an association close their gym, their pool, their community center because of COVID-19?
Again, you have to follow the state and local regulations. So gyms are required to be closed. You know, you want to follow this, all the state and local regulations. But if there is some kind of amenity that you can follow the social distancing guidelines and keep open to kind of encourage, keep the residents occupied, then, again, talk to your attorney, see if there is something that you can do to, keep the community okay. Because again, you have a lot of residents at home. They're in the community. If there is something that you can do to uplift your community spirits, I think your community would appreciate that. So talk to your attorney though first. Always talk to your attorney. You do not want to violate any rules, and you want to keep your community safe. So before you do anything, talk to your attorney. Make sure that you're not violating any rules, and then see if there is something that you have in your community that's available, that you will not be violating any social distancing rules, and then you won't be violating any local or state ordinances, then you may be able to use some of your amenities that are there, that that if you can keep them sanitary and you can actually use.
In terms of getting with the attorney, right? I know for me, it's getting a little bit difficult to follow all the different rules and guidelines. You've got CNN, you've got MSNBC, Fox, you've got all different types of regulations. It seems that the onus has been placed on different state officials. So it's hard to track that. So I think more important than ever to get with your attorney, right? To designate, say, these are the rules for us, right?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Because, and they change every day.
Well, I saw a nice photo or video of people at the pool, at the beaches the other day. That was interesting. But anyway, not me. And going now to you, Jen. Speaking of that, what kind of responsibility and liability does an association board of directors have in regards to maybe reducing the contamination in the community? What is their onus of protocol? Like, how does a board approach minimizing the risk, and what do they have to do, and what should they do?
Well, we touched on a bunch of that. So I think if you kind of put together a lot of the things we talked about addresses that. We haven't talked about those communities with a golf course and or a restaurant or both, or a bar that all is together, because I think people know that golf has been declared essential. How that acts in practice is a little bit uncertain. Everybody's dealing with it a little bit differently, but assuming if you've got a third party in your community that includes a business that may or may not be essential, I think it is up to the community to address those people. Most golf courses are owned by somebody else. Sometimes the restaurant's owned by another person. If, say, you've got another type of business within your association, there is an obligation to reach out to those businesses, see what they're doing, communicate to the residents what they're doing, and potentially, depending on what the legal relationships is between everyone, if they're not doing proper sanitation, if the restaurant's letting people in to have a drink and not just doing to go, probably is an obligation to check into that. And then if they, or share, like, look, we're sanitizing our laundry room, this is who we're using, why don't you do that? So, I mean, all that's a little, that those become weird slippery slopes, but there's lots of associations that have other businesses within them, and they're either residents are using them or third parties are coming in to use them. So I do think you have an obligation to at least check and do your due diligence and see what's going on, and let the residents know if it's a concern or not a concern. I mean, I think they probably are concerned, so you should address it with them in one way or the other.
Right. And in terms of cleaning, we really touched on
Yep.
that as well, but taking an effort to do the extra cleaning, if possible, right?
Exactly.
Good. Okay, transitioning, guests in your community. Florence, we'll start with you. Can the association place any restrictions on short-term rentals because of the pandemic?
Yes, I mean, the state of Florida already did. So because the state of Florida did, yes, associations can follow that same restriction and place a restriction on short-term rentals. So, but again, talk to your attorney. You want to make sure that you're following the state restrictions when you're doing it, but talk to your attorney on how you actually implement that. Because how you implementing, you want to make sure you're implementing the legal way.
Right. Well, and that, so Jen, can an association legally prohibit any guests from entering the community at this time?
No, not if it's the private property. Again, if it's common area, or there's something you could potentially do. If there is Airbnb going on in your community or short-term rentals, even if they're allowed potentially, but not allowed by your governing documents, I think there you could step it up a little bit. That's always a struggle of figuring out if somebody's really an Airbnb or what's happening with that. But to the extent that if it's a private resident and it's used against your governing documents, this might be a time to be a little bit more aggressive and or to have a little bit more of an opportunity to look into that than some people are coming and going every day. Again, you don't want to target anyone, you don't want to bother anybody, but a house with many, many vehicles at it that you don't think is just like a family with a bunch of teenagers, there shouldn't be that much. I am having calls on that where people are upset about the social distancing and people coming and going and guests. That's coming up. So again, don't do anything without talking to your attorney, but there might be an opportunity if your governing documents don't allow to do a little bit more investigation about a house that you were concerned about anyway. I think most boards have a couple of houses that they suspect are an Airbnb that aren't allowed. This might be a chance to at least get a positive to address that situation, but do it carefully.
Well, and we've been a big advocate and proponent for pushing people to amend their documents, and I think now they're seeing even a bigger reason. I know a lot of people the documents don't really speak of what to do when a pandemic strikes or documents being 20, 30 years old in some cases, maybe even more, especially with Airbnbs, right? So great time to rethink all those things and amend the documents to get updated and current with the times we're living in. Florence, so in terms of, we talked a little bit about, essential services getting done. Can the association even prohibit an owner from undertaking any renovation projects, or can they prevent contractors and workers from entering any property?
I mean, no, because it's an essential service. I mean, the only way you can restrict it is if they didn't get ARB approval beforehand. So if they didn't submit the correct approval process, then you can, go that route. But other than that, it's an essential service. So if they followed all the protocols, then they have every right to be there.
And what about non-essential? Is there things that an association can prevent? Like, can they stick their foot down and keep them from doing that, or?
An ice cream truck, maybe.
Not the ice cream truck.
You're mean.
I was mean.
I like ice cream. But a little with the vanilla ice cream cone. All right.
Really.
The kids, Florence, the kids. Cabin fever.
Nice pollution. I'm just kidding.
No. Okay. Moving on. Let's get off the pain and suffering of not having ice cream trucks. All right. Pending construction repair contracts. How should an association address those pending construction projects, Jen? I'm kind of touching on this, but anything else to add on that, in terms of?
Well, and that kind of gets to like having those third parties in your community and monitoring them. Most likely you need to have the construction projects going, probably because of how your budget is, the contract you have with the contractor. Some contractors are actually stepping it up and finishing things because they have they have to work where the people can keep paying them and things. But again, I would monitor and see because your residents, if they see people not with masks, if they don't look like they're being safe, if they're going to be concerned. So don't be the ostrich and ignore that. Hit it head on. Get with the principal or who's ever on site and just make sure it looks safe. Because if you get that little twinge that it seems like they might not be doing everything that they should and they're not being reasonable, your residents are going to be upset too. So again, address it and communicate. Address it and communicate. Don't ignore it.
You talk a lot about ostriches lately. I think I'm going to buy you an ostrich stuffed animal. Head in the sand. Help me. I don't know what to do.
No, I hate the ostrich.
Well, it's my understanding that a few other random questions last minute have come in, and I thought I'd turn it over to you. I think they came to you, Jen. Certainly want to be an empowering law firm and hit every corner and nook and cranny that we can and have the ability to. Why don't you go ahead and speak on that? I know they came in, and we'll of course elaborate if we can, but help us lead the way into the next section.
Sure, I have a couple. Two of them, I'll go over two. One of them sort of fits with other stuff we've talked about, and one's a total outlier. So one of the questions was if the association's late fees, which most are, some of them have done it very informally. I'm sure probably they're going to start doing it more formally during this time. How long should the suspension last? And if the assessments aren't paid after the suspension, can you go back and start from the date of no payment? So basically, if somebody takes advantage of this to not pay their assessments, because that is unfortunately going to happen, a lot of people are going to need it, but a few people are going to take advantage of it. I would say it's a little bit difficult to know now. What we did, and everybody who asked me, I said, let's just do a month. I think at a minimum, we're probably going to need 3 months of suspending late fees on assessments. And then at that point, we'll be able to see where we are. Your collection policy probably does not address this. Again, like nobody wrote this stuff thinking about the pandemic that might come or that's here. But when you're redoing your documents or your policies, which are a whole lot easier, then potentially you should address this. It just came up a couple years ago with Irma. I know a lot of my associations suspended late fees with Irma as well. So, this pandemic's crazy, but hurricanes aren't. So it's probably time to relook at even that policy, the collection policy for this sort of thing. So you come up with a standard. I would say in there you can address whether you go back and put the late fees in. Normally, what I see associations do, and I think you should do that but even when you don't have these sort of issues, that if you offer them a payment plan and they end up paying in full, then you do waive some late fees, because there's late fees, there's interest, and there's potentially attorney's fees. Mm-hmm. And how your attorney charges. We've seen sort of an uptick in the attorneys charging more on the residents for stuff that really shouldn't cost the attorney that much. they're not making the association pay it out front, but then the members are paying it. So all that stuff to look at when you're kind of doing your collections policy and setting up your contract with your attorney. But I think waiving something for somebody who pays in full as they promised to do is always a good practice, no matter why they didn't pay.
Yeah. And definitely association, board of directors, CAMs, please do your due diligence when people offer free services to you, because if they're going to be paid by the offending homeowners, you want to find out what that number is, because at the end of the day, you're going to make some people angry, and you don't want to have an adversarial community that's annoyed at the board and then causing turnover and all these other things. Because we're seeing a lot of that, right? Like the price gouging has gotten a little bit ridiculous. So
Yeah,
anyway.
it's sad when $100 fine or $100 thing that you didn't pay for your monthly fee turns into like $3,000. I mean, that really, I think everybody agrees that shouldn't happen.
Sure. Okay.
There's one other question, and this does kind of fit because on my Avalon Park message board, they ask about, they've been complaining about this too. Speeding and speed bumps. People are driving around more. There are more cars on the road. So it's a little bit harder to speed sometimes, but then also kids are playing in the road. There's a lot more people around. So speeding and speed bumps. This is an issue that comes up in a lot of communities, and you can potentially get speed bumps in your community. Some people hate them. Some people love them. There is a process for doing it depending on whether you live in a city or a county and where you live. Orange County has a very specific process where there's petitions that you go around and having so many members sign, and then they can be put in. Like I said, every city has an ordinance that deals with this, so you kind of specific. But if you are having a speeding problem, I mean, I can attest to working with Orange County, especially, and most of, obviously there's Orange County, at least is mostly county based, not city based, whereas Seminole, we've got all our cities to deal with. There are other ways to deal with things. There are roundabouts, which people don't like. There's other methods that you could do besides a speed bump. One of the other things that can be done is the speeding, like I think we've all seen, like your speed is, they put up the sign and it tells you what your speed is. At least Orange County has a few of those, and you as a community, so not everybody can get it, but an HOA board, they will lend them to HOA boards to use to try to see. You can rent them, you could buy them too, but I know Orange County, if you're having a speeding problem, that's a good place to start. You can also ask the county to come out and do a traffic study. I mean, you probably don't want to do that right now because there's less cars, but they'll come out and informally look and then potentially do give you some suggestions that aren't a speed bump. So again, if you have, there's a lot of different ways to deal with it. If you have an attorney or a community company that's savvy with that, they'll be able to give you lots of tools in the toolbox, not just a speed bump. So again, start the discussion, get experts around you, and find out what all your options are. Just don't think you only have one option and then not do it, because everybody hates the idea of a speed bump.
Sure. Excellent. Well, I think that wraps up our questions. I did want to give everybody some information. We have some people that are new and also clients. If you have any questions that you'd like us to help you with and assist you with, we'd be more than happy to communicate that with you. Our website is www.theorlandolawgroup.com. You can reach us there. Our phone number, the main phone number to our Waterford Lakes office is 407-512-4394. And if you didn't know, we actually do have 4 offices covering the 4 corners of Orlando. Altamont Springs, Lake Nona, Waterford Lakes, of course, is our corporate hub, and the Winter Garden office. So we're covering all 4 corners of Orlando. But as everybody knows, I'm a social media guy. I'm all over the place. So especially in terms of community association work, you can find me at Mark King 14 on Facebook. You can find our law firm on Facebook, LinkedIn. We're pretty much everywhere, and we will continue to have empowering Q&As like this, not just dedicated to homeowners associations and condo associations, but everything. COVID-19 is a scary time. I think we're learning a lot. We're trying to innovate. We're new things are happening almost on a daily basis. Everything is changing, but we are certainly the people's champ, trying to be the law firm out there that's empowering everybody with the important relative information to help you guys navigate this situation the best way possible. So please, by all means, and if you want to email me, mking@theorlandolawgroup.com. Happy to help you guys in any way. Any last words? I want to thank, of course, our presenting attorneys here, Jennifer Englert and Florence King. Thank you all for providing this information. Any last words from either of you?
Thank you.
I have to say, you got a nice job, Jennifer, Florence, and the hat. So I'm the hat, just so you know.
Hey, everything is marketing in my world. You will remember the hat, and I've got new ones on the way. So look out for the hat, marketingfedoras.com.
You need an endorsement deal. Hat companies out there.
Yes. Sponsored by fedora.com. Anyway, well, thank everyone for participating. We're always available. Let me know if we can assist you, and be safe, and everybody be blessed.
Thanks, everyone.